Hey, welcome back to my channel. It is your girl JB, and I'm excited because I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different today, but super important, and that is sustainability. So before we get into it though, if you want to learn more ways to wear what you own, if you like minimal beauty, if you like style, you like life, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, go ahead and follow me. So today is going to be a long form talking video because I really wanted to talk about sustainability, especially from the point of somebody who's working through it with a really big company. Lately, I've been on TikTok and I've been seeing a lot of people labeling companies as greenwashing because even though they might have a more sustainable product because they don't have other things in place that are socially responsible and things like that, they're like downplaying some of the things that are happening in these big companies. And I really want to talk about that as somebody, again, who's in it, who's like working through it, as to why that might be, because I think that there is this lack of transparency between consumers and businesses for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, some of it is like NDA and legal reasons, and other reasons just, you know, I think it's just so new that we don't really know how to talk about it with our consumers. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with like a big broad brush. So sustainability is loosely defined as making sure that we have resources and can make what we want to make now while still leaving enough over for later generations to also be able to survive. That's a very loose translation, and that is about all that everybody can agree on, right? And I think that's the first issue, is that what I'm seeing a lot of is how certain people define sustainability is not the same as how some of these companies are defining sustainability. And that is because there just isn't a generally accepted, here is what's sustainable. And what I mean by that is we are doing what are called life cycle assessments, which help to analyze the environmental impacts of a material based on a bunch of different categories. But even that is not conclusive. And the best that we can do is use that to compare A to B. So material A through process A, supply chain A, through maybe even the same material A, but process B, supply chain B, right? And there is no value set right now to be like, okay, you can only have, you know, this much CO2 usage, this much water usage, this much land usage. There's no limits there. And so a lot of what's happening right now, again, is I think that people are viewing sustainability just differently. So a lot of companies are focusing on sustainability in terms of environmental impacts, but a lot of consumers are wanting that to also include animal welfare and social responsibility, which means like livable wages and working conditions, which are equally important, but depending on the company may be viewed as a separate category that they are focusing on. And I think why this is important to talk about when you have these debates is setting these kind of expectations and definitions, because then it makes it easier for people to contextualize what's being said. Because a lot of stuff that gets said is just said very specifically to one thing, but can't be applied across the board, right? So let's talk about this. Even within my own company, it is really crazy how long we have been working through defining what we want to say is even just a sustainable material. Not even like a sustainable process, just like what raw material based off of the environmental impact data we have would be considered sustainable. Because again, right now, all we can really say is A is better than B, which means at some point A can be seen as unsustainable compared to a different material. So we're trying to draw this line right now that just doesn't exist in terms of like what could be considered sustainable. Like if it had these values for the material itself in terms of all the inputs to grow the material, you know, and the process it goes through, what do those values look like that it is sustainable? This is considered sustainable, because a lot of stuff it's just comparisons at this point. It's A to B. And speaking with these experts as we're working through, even in our own company, working with consultants, working with different tools, right? Even that's different. And a lot of people also are putting a lot of weight in life cycle assessments, not understanding that it's only as good as the data that we receive, right? So taking a step back, I'm seeing a lot of companies like H&M and Zara being called greenwashing because they are using recycled products, which from all the research, even within my own company, but across the board, recycled material is less environmentally impactful than virgin materials. That we have seen through data. So technically speaking, a recycled product is more sustainable, but because a lot of these companies are using the same supply chain, which may be using not so friendly work wages or work environments, a lot of people are upset with how these companies are labeling their products. And here's where I want to break into, because this is a very multi-level issue. First of all, companies, especially big companies, do not own everything in their supply chain. So from a car perspective, we own the plants that assemble the pieces of the car, but the pieces are given to us by a different supplier. And that supplier also has suppliers of its own. So we have us, maybe a tier 1 supplier, then their supplier, which would be a tier 2 supplier, and their supplier, which would be a tier 3 supplier. We only own us. And then we get stuff from a tier 1 supplier, which is a separate company. And a lot of people don't understand this. And why understanding this is important is because where these other suppliers of ours are located means that they're gonna have different laws around labor. And all we as a company can do is say, hey, we want these things from a supplier to have good working conditions, good labor conditions. And we can give them a time frame and say, hey, right now we don't think that you have it, but come back in 5-6 months and let's see if you've improved. But that company can be like, screw you, and decide not to improve. And then we have to go ahead and find another company who would be capable of producing the same quality material in the timeframes that we're used to. And there is this assumption that there's a one-to-one. That like, okay, so for every one bad manufacturing company, there's gotta be a good one with like good working conditions. One, obviously these companies that are a little bit further removed from us, they're not gonna come and tell us like, we have horrible work wages, we're like hiring children and we're paying them like dirt. They're gonna try their hardest to keep that from us, one. So like, it's not like we're just like, oh yeah, like they try their darndest, obviously, because they know we don't want like those things to hide it from us and do it anyway. That is a thing. But even beyond that, that's something to consider. And the other thing to consider too, right? Like, so say all of a sudden, like all of us decide, hey, we're not gonna work with this supplier because they have bad working conditions. The assumption is that they're gonna like change. And they might not choose to change, and then they could just go out of business. And then that's gonna look bad on us. Like all these big companies just pulled out of like all these suppliers in this third world country, and now all these people like don't have a job. Like, right? Like, so this cancel culture and this like, companies really are like overthinking in a way, having to overthink in a way, because cancel culture and this calling out of companies, for mislabeling or not being truthful, does have these harmful effects where now companies are like almost too scared to even move, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, we want to move out, but then if it does come out that we all pushed away and then all these people all like no longer have a job thanks to us, like what's that gonna look like, right? Like that's a very real concern. And again, I'm not saying that to excuse companies who continue to work with bad companies. I'm not saying this to excuse anything. I'm literally just sharing this information, right? I'm just sharing this because I think a lot of people get so zeroed in on like the one good thing that they don't think about the unintended consequences of that one good thing. Like very rarely is one thing just like great all the way across the board. And that gets into my next thing, right? Is that, we might find a supplier that does have good, livable wages, good working environment, but they don't produce the quality that we're looking for, or they do, but it's not sustainable anymore, right? Like the material itself, not like obviously the working wages. So they're socially responsible, but now we're missing that sustainable quality, right? Because the other thing that we don't control as a company is the secret formula, right? So we can put in our request, hey, we don't want any of these really, really harmful chemicals. We also would like this, that, and the other, but how the company decides to get to that point, our supplier gets to that point, we don't control that either. We don't control their processes. We don't control any of that. So we can ask, and what we do is we do what are called tech reviews. So we'll ask a bunch of our suppliers. We'll say, okay, here's our 10 suppliers, here's what we're asking for, and they're all gonna come back to us and tell us, if they can or what they're gonna do if they can't, right? But if all of them are like are lacking, our stuff, we want our stuff to get made, right? Like, so we're like, well, so none of y'all, right, have it. So I think that's, again, just something to consider, just something to take into account is that, right? So that's one of the hard reasons about this greenwashing thing, and about not having a standardized understanding of what sustainability truly means, or a definition. Because again, like you run into all these things like where technically, yes, the material itself is more sustainable, but because you were hoping that it also had the social responsibility aspect and it doesn't, you know, you're dismissing what is actually like recycled material. You guys like to break down polyester and respin it and put it back into something. Like, that's incredible. I just like, that is a feat. Like, that is pretty, and that just doesn't, I feel like stuff like that doesn't get enough credit, if I'm honest. Like, not that it excuses the other stuff, it doesn't, but like, bro. And I think the other thing a lot of people need to consider too is cost in a lot of different ways. So even our own company, right? We'll just look at us as a case study. We decided we were going to try a couple different routes to figure out how best to measure and manage sustainability in our company. So we hired some consultants. I want you to take this into consideration, just to analyze, not even in depth, not even like through the whole supply chain, through all the processes. Like, you know, we basically looked at the raw material, you know, and the raw material to get put into a form that we as a company would purchase. That was $50,000 for like 5 materials. Okay, I just want you to so that's like $10,000 per material. And that's not even to get like a full understanding of the whole thing it goes through. That's expensive. And when you have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of materials, like that is just a lot of money. And so the other question is, okay, so then hiring the expertise, right? Sustainability and assessing sustainability is still so new. There's really not a bunch of experts, right? Like, at best, it's like, okay, we can hire people who've created some of the tools, but even then they would do it as a consultant. They wouldn't work for us full time, because there's so many other companies who are looking at that and the tools. So now we're looking, okay, if we don't want to hire a consultant every time, what does it look like to get these tools? Just to do a pilot tool. Just to get a pilot of like, let's see if we like this tool, was $10,000 for like a certificate for one person. So again, like, expensive just to try out the tool, let alone the amount of money and manpower it would be like, okay, we want the tool. So how do we get the tool, do all the testing to make it work how we want it to work, and then train people, because again, it's such a new tool that there are just not experts. Train people to, one, use the tool, then be proficient at the tool, right? Like it's an investment, it's a large investment, and unfortunately, like, COVID did not help, you know, even these big companies who want to invest and do that, you know what I mean? Like, how do you make that happen? And that's just to assess like the materials and the process. Like, that isn't to talk about the other side of it, which is the actual cost of the material itself. So, okay, we've tested, like, we've analyzed it, you know, it meets our standards as a company, which that's a separate discussion. I'll get into it in a second. It meets our standards as a company for performance. How much does it cost? And a lot of the more sustainable materials right now are just not a cost neutral, which meaning like they're the same cost as what we're using now, or a decrease. What we're seeing is, unfortunately, a lot of the materials we are considering that are more sustainable cost more money. What does that mean? Companies have three ways of cutting costs, right? The material itself. So if you look at a car, right, and a car costs $20,000, what we're saying is, okay, for all the materials, like, you guys have $20,000, and then each, you know, group, like the body group, the chassis group, the interiors group, we're all like beefing out, like, I need this much money for my stuff, and I need this much money for my stuff, and I want this much money for my stuff, you know, but we all have to come to agreement so it's not more than 20,000, right? So what that sometimes means is that, okay, the whole thing can't be sustainable. Maybe we'll make this choice, that choice, and this choice, you know, to keep the cost the way it is. Or, okay, we're gonna just go with all the sustainable materials. So instead of the car costing $20,000, it might cost $25,000. So if we don't want that to impact the customer, the company has to cut costs in terms of overhead, which usually means like people or facilities or new technologies, right? So that means, okay, maybe, and how that usually impacts will probably be people who are, you know, usually where I'm at, which is not minimum wage, you know, but we're not the CEOs, but we have just enough money that it's like, you guys can take it if we don't give you any more money this for the next couple of years, right? Or lastly, we don't worry about the cost at all, and you as a consumer are gonna have to see that increase in cost. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's fine and dandy, I would pay more money for sustainable material, except you don't. Anybody who's in user design, shout out to my mom, understands that like you can't ask people questions like, would you like, or do you like, or would you prefer? Because in theory, in our utopian mind, of course I would love sustainable materials until, you know, and of course I would pay more for it until it comes time to actually pay more for it. It's like, of course I'm gonna start my diet on Monday. Monday comes, do you start your diet? No, right? Like, we all say things, it's the human condition. We say things that sound good and we do want to do, but do we always do them? No. No. So then so how does that affect us? So if a company goes through all of this money, we invested all this money just to determine if stuff is sustainable, put it in our vehicles, and it costs a little more, and you don't buy it, then the company's gonna go, well, what was the point of any of that? Like, in the nicest way. Like, I know a lot of people are like, again, it's so funny that it's so interesting to watch people. And again, I'm just sharing this not to excuse companies, but it's just interesting to see it all kind of play out, because it's like, okay, the same people who are like, oh, it should be okay to say I'm working at a job for money are the same people who are like, it shouldn't just be about the money for companies to want to do what's right for the universe, right? I mean, can you see just a bit of hypocriticalness? Again, and not excusing companies at all. It's just interesting, right? So that plays a whole role too, in that, okay, so if the company went through all that to give you guys this, and then you're either not gonna buy it or you're gonna shame them because it's not perfect, right? That's discouraging as a company. And then they're gonna sit there the next time they have to make a decision and go, and you wonder why it takes so long. Like generally speaking, going into the time part of it, the projects I'm working on are for vehicles that are 5 years out. That's how long it takes to develop things. And I don't think people have that appreciation either. Like, you guys are asking for more efficient processes, more sustainable materials. Those take time. And even the stuff that's out there, like people are calling out like, oh yeah, there's, I've seen mushroom leather, I've seen cactus leather. It's like, just use that. And we're like, except for they don't meet the quality that you guys are used to. Which again is gonna come around and bite us in the butt, right? Or they're not scaled up even to give us the amount of material we need. And they need time to get there. So it's just a very, very complicated, my camera's getting hot. So it's very, very complicated. Again, I don't share that to, again, give a pass to any companies. I think it's really important though for people on the outside to hear it from some people who are on the inside who are working towards this, because I see it, my company really does, and the people in the company really want to do this, and we want to do it right. But the problem is then that slows us down too, because we're trying to do everything so perfectly, so that, so perfectly that, as any perfectionist knows, you almost don't do anything. Where it's like, okay, we need to get it just right. And instead of getting it just right, I think a lot of people need to extend grace that we are making steps in the right direction. And I know we want it to be fast, and we are working hard. Companies are working hard to try and get there, but it just does take time. So that is it for now, guys. I think I will make this like a bi-monthly or like every quarter type update, because I think it's just really interesting and it's really fascinating, just to kind of to see it all, I mean, like to see it as it pertains to the auto industry, how it affects the fashion industry, and how it all kind of comes together. Being both obviously like a consumer, a content creator, and the person on the inside trying to make these changes towards sustainability, right? So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me know that you enjoy these kinds of things. If you aren't following me, here are my social media handles, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.